Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Should I Start a Podcast? Today, I have a treat for you, like every other day. This is an amazing. This live is coming to you from Croatia, and I'm so excited to have Kiri-Maree Moore on the show. But in today's episode, we're going to talk about how important your voice is, the journey of actually putting your voice out there and getting the reps in, doing a podcast, uh, to address a need on the planet. We're going to get into that. I'm going to also talk about a mistake that we make as business owners with a podcast, and that is forgetting to make sure your audio in your podcast is of the same volume. I'll talk about that and I'll address that towards the end of the show. But if you're looking for an edited version of this recording, you'll find it at Should I Start a Podcast? You'll find that on all the podcast platforms. And I'm very excited to introduce Kiri-Maree Moore, who has got two podcasts, one of which she does live. It's called the Decision Table Podcast and Global Human Intelligence Podcast as well. And I've known her for a while. I've hung out with her, and she is an amazing human being. So I'm excited to get this going. Kiri-Maree, how are you?
It's so good to be here, and thank you for the privilege to, have a conversation again with you. I love our conversations, and I'm sure this is going to be no exception to it being an awesome one. So I'm doing good. I'm in Split, Croatia right now, so it's pretty warm over here in Europe.
And you kind of made this decision to work and travel the world and have fun while doing it. What has that journey been like from initially starting it off? Like when you start, because that's something like, so the reason I'm asking the question is like, as entrepreneurs, we have these dreams of what freedom looks like, but we kind of don't take action on the dreams. And do you feel like taking action on those dreams allowed the world to open up for you?
Firstly, I am married to someone that you know very well, and he is a bit of a squirrel, likes to be very busy all the time. And so it was not really an option right at the start if I wanted to keep my marriage together. And so I thought, how can I make it not just something I kind of have to do, but something I'd love to do? And I never had kids to sort of, you do work, you then do kids, you then do your partnership. It was always about how do we do this as an ecosystem, as in a journey. And that began our nomadic journey. And one of the things I loved that came out of that, Ronsley, was the fact that I got to have amazing conversations to amazing, and I mean amazing humans across the globe. And I think that was something that doesn't cost me anything to have a conversation, and yet you can learn so much from it. And I think that became what came out of that was I felt a little selfish almost, because I got to have these amazing conversations, but you didn't get to hear those. And I think that was the thing that sort of was like, what if I was to bring these conversations to the wider environment, that you could literally listen over my shoulder and listen in on it.
So, I mean, what has that journey been like, and when did you start? I mean, obviously you've been having these conversations forever, and I've heard some of the really cool people you've had conversations with. So maybe let's start with that part.
Mm.
Like when you think back about all the cool conversations you've had, recorded and not recorded, which ones come to mind? What do you think about?
I think one of the most amazing things with conversations is those that we have over a meal, those that we have over a coffee, those that sort of you think no one else is listening, but you just go deep in. And I wanted to be able to have those conversations and then to remember some of those things, and then maybe help others to learn something from the conversation I just got to have. And I think that was the thing that I realized. It's really easy to have a conversation with someone. All you need to do is invite them. And I have had the privilege of closed doors with former presidents of countries. I've had the privilege of spending time with, just phenomenal entrepreneurs, to the everyday person who might be doing something amazing in the village of Fiji. And I wanted to bring all of that and I didn't really know how to do that in a way that was going to bring it out to the world better. And that's kind of where I was like, well, everyone kept saying it to me, you need to get podcasts. And I put together podcasts. But here's the cool thing, there's actually two reasons to why I do the podcast. And I think this is really important. The global human intelligence, that's my voice. That's just everything. You get whatever is popping out of my brain in that moment. The decision table was a place, you know, those moments when people say, you should go speak to this person. Oh, you need to connect with that person. Ronsley, like you, I'm an amazing introvert. And I was like, but what do I talk to them about? How do I start a conversation? And so I had this brilliant idea. Okay, if you want to talk to me, if you want to connect, and maybe we'll go somewhere with this, but something that's really important to me, my life, is for you to be a giver. So if you're willing to give, then you're willing to come on my show. We will actually have a conversation where we can deep dive, and I'm really going to get to know whether or not we're going to connect further on. And it was the best thing I ever did,
Yeah.
was do that show.
Yeah, it's such a. I mean, I feel like I stumbled across this medium, but I kind of found out a few weeks ago that it's been 10 years of me doing this, and the kind of conversations as well that I've landed having, which I would normally probably not necessarily have, just like, just given off the cuff, because I'm kind of put in this environment that I forced to sort of show up. I put my introverted side in my little pocket and just kind of like show up for this, and it's it does. I wonder what does that do for you? How do you show up when you kind of have these interviews? Like, what does it take? Do you have
I
prep?
love it. I don't think of it as an interview. I think of it as a conversation. And I go, how would I show up if I was just going to hang out with you with a cup of coffee and have a conversation? That's how I show up on the show. And the whole thing, my only outcome out of it is this. What if I could role model that it's easy as having a conversation with someone, that you could learn something from them? Doesn't matter what distinctions they come with. So if they look different, sound different, really into things that are really different to you, you can learn from this other human being. And so so that's social proof that really it's about having a conversation, and we can always learn one thing. So my question, that is only question the same on every decision table, is this question. Okay, so from our conversation today, what are you taking from that? Here's the amazing thing. I've never met this person before. I have only just had a really amazing conversation with them. But there's always something I can learn from that. And I think that's a powerful thing, that if we are going to change what's happening across the globe, it starts with a conversation. And that conversation is as easy as showing up on a link and having a conversation online.
And
with your coffee.
Right. And here's the thing: you're doing this from Croatia, and I appreciate you doing this, because you could potentially be doing so many other things in sunny Croatia, and you showing up for this conversation. So, what I'd love to ask you is, when you think about conversations that you want to have that are not being had, right? What are those conversations that we need to look at?
Yeah, I think part of that is having a new conversation, right? Like, it's easy to continue having the same conversations with people that look like you, sound like you, and are doing the same thing. It's always nice having fan clubs, right? Like, it's good, it boosts the ego, whatever it is. What is difficult is when we have a new conversation. And if we are going to do things that are different going forward and disrupt the patterns that are not working for us across culture right now, then we have to learn to have a different conversation, a new conversation with different people at the table. And honestly, that's actually not that easy for many to have or to do. So I want to just show different ways in which we can role model that in simple ways that anyone can do. Yeah. Anyone could have a conversation with anyone online and press record, right, and then put it up to a podcast. So that's what I've done. And, I grateful for the relationships that I've built from it, and grateful for the opportunity that has opened up because I've been willing just to have a simple conversation.
I mean, the lots of conversations that you have are conversations where sometimes, I mean, you mentioned that if someone looks like you and talks like you, it's like the conversation, we want to have conversations that where maybe someone disagrees with us. How
Yeah.
do we have those conversations? What do we keep in mind when we're having those conversations? How do we like probably allow the conversations to unfold and maybe keep an open mind while having them? What is your process like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think it's easy when you have it with like-minded people. You know the sort of questions, you know where the conversation's probably going to go. The hardest is when you've got people that maybe are in industries that you have no idea about. But I think there's common patterns. You know, we all care deeply about something. What is it that you care about? There's things, that frameworks we can take a conversation through, and I've got lots of different ones in which we can do that. What is and I also say that let's have lenses rather than, you know, going with your set questions and going, this is where we're taking the conversation. I always know, like I said, the outcome to what I want from a conversation. And mostly, honestly, the outcome is, oh, I wonder if we're going to do this journey together going forward. I wonder what's the one thing that we could connect on, that we could make some change and get something happening. What is it that I'm learning from this person that I didn't know before? If you go with an open mind, there's so much you can learn from a conversation, and it's not daunting. But I think if you go with a closed mind, knowing that you know what type of person they are, you know what they're going to be into, then there's not that willingness to keep evolving. And I think that when we see difference at the table, we see that as a disadvantage. I see it as an advantage. I see it as a secret advantage to, maybe they've got the secret sauce to what you don't know yet, but when you do, it's going to be a good thing. And I also think that disagreeing isn't me getting upset with you. It's me getting stronger to what I believe, or it's me going, I'm questioning what I'm thinking right now. And I'm okay with that if you're okay, because I'm not going to learn what I don't know if we're not willing to have this conversation. And if things are to change at the table, we have to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. We have to do some of these tough conversations.
There's so many things that you mentioned there. One is the table. One is having the conversations that are difficult, and the other is being open minded and being present when you're having those conversations. I feel like there are topics that you care about. There's the 1%. There are these initiatives that you care very, very deeply about, leadership as well. I wonder if you could sort of summarize a couple of things. One is, what is it from a business perspective that you do, and how does the podcast kind of help you achieve those goals?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I do is I literally help smart people make smarter decisions, right? And create sustainable solution pathways to narrow that gap from problem to solution. And what I love about the podcast in that way is that it helps me to have these conversations. Maybe conversations with people that I normally wouldn't. So again, I might learn something new. But it also helps to really cement some of the things that I think is so important right now. You know, one of the initiatives that you mentioned was the 1% movement. This is what our whole world is about right now. And it's about this whole fact that if everyone was, my belief, this is my belief, right, is that if everyone did their 1%, I did my 1%, you did your 1%, Mary down the road does her 1%, Richard does his, Mark does his, we actually would shift what is happening across culture across the globe from problem to solution. And so, in this big initiative, my big goal on that is to get 1 billion names by 2052. And that would be, so they predict, a tenth of the population. Now, do you think if a tenth of the population were making decisions that added value to the human race, not take away, that we would actually maybe change something that is happening right now? So one of the things is I can talk to you, one by one, right beside each other, but I can talk to many and have a voice to the masses by being able to have conversations on a podcast. And the reason I have two is because they're very, very different podcasts. One is very much having people that I don't know at my table. The other one is these amazing humans that I do know that maybe you don't know, and then I have them at my table on the Global Human Intelligence podcast. And then I will really dig deep on some of those learnings that we had from that conversation and then go down rabbit holes and just give more thinking around that. And I really appreciate having a platform where if you don't want to listen to me, I'm real good with that. You don't have to listen to the podcast. That's the good thing about it, right? But if you want to listen to maybe some new thinking, maybe some other ways in which people are doing it, or I'm finding out that is working in business in changing what is happening in culture, then maybe you'd want to listen to the podcast. And I think that's the bigger thing, is that we all have a story, we all have a voice. And maybe for some, it's a small voice that you're just sharing with other people. For me, I feel part of my vision, my bigger purpose in life is to have a voice that goes to a lot more. So, the podcast gives that opportunity, right?
Right. I mean, there's one of the things that I have here on a little post-it note. And by the way, this post-it note idea is from your husband. It's like it's an obsession now. It's like everywhere. But the post-it note here is I use my voice because a lot of my ancestors didn't get a chance to use theirs.
Yeah.
And I wonder what parts of that, I'm especially, I know a lot of conversations that you've had in the past with elders and bringing that culture into this world that we're in right now. What parts of that do you resonate with when I read that out about our ancestors not necessarily having the opportunity to have a voice in a lot of the conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak very much from my own life of I was that kid that didn't have a voice. And because of that, there was a lot of things, systems, power play, many different things that meant that I didn't feel I had a voice and I lost what I was meant to do in life. And I never want anyone else to feel like that. I definitely don't want my kids to grow up thinking they can't do or be or have a voice in a way that they want to and choose to make a difference. And so for me, I didn't want that pattern to continue. And for that to stop, I needed to find my own voice. And, my work that I do, I get to have a voice with many and help others to find their voice. What I love about the podcast world is that it has given me the opportunity to share that and to give more voice to maybe what would have only been heard by a couple of people. I think one of the other things that I think of is, through all of the conversations I've had, and by the way, in 3 months, there was over 100 and something conversations.
Wow.
At the beginning of last year. Like I did that to gather data for something that I'm working on. And, in those conversations, there are things that you learn that I just would never have if I hadn't asked questions. And I think, the way we ask questions in the systems that have been of the past, in the conversations in the past, even the principles and like if I think of leadership in itself, there was a set way in which you did it, an accepted way. And I think we have got to start having conversations, bringing the real conversations, the real questions that many of us are asking, into a place where it's safe to have that out in the world. And I hope, if there's nothing else anyone ever gets from the conversations I have, that they see that it is okay to have these conversations. It's okay to ask questions. It's not okay to pull the other person down. It's not okay. It's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to, pull them down, to pull their thinking down. And a lot of the old systems and a lot of the old way we did, unless you thought the same way, you were not able to have that conversation. By the way, this does not make you loved by everyone. It doesn't make it easy. And it's definitely not something for the lighthearted. I have got on conversations and had them on my podcast where I totally disagree with what the other person is saying on the other end. But I've still learned something from that person. Yeah. And I can tell you, every single human has been an amazing human. Yeah. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned at the start of this part where you had 100 conversations in a few months, and you were doing it to gather data. So here's what I'd love to ask you on that. What did you learn, and how did you set it up to ask those questions, and what were you looking for?
So every month was, because I actually haven't got them done yet, but I've got all the information for it. And I wanted to write 3 white papers on 3 different specific areas. One is the new approach, the need for a new approach. That was 1 month's theme. The next one was the secret advantage of human intelligence. That was the next one. And then the third one was looking through the global lens of humanity as stakeholders. I just had conversations around those all month with, just random leaders, and asking what they were thinking and how this was for them. Yeah. And to look at the patterns of do we need a new approach? Reality was every single one said we needed a new approach. Are we getting smarter humans, or are we just expecting and afraid of AI getting smarter? These are questions that I think we need to start asking, right? If we're making building out businesses, organizations, companies, are we actually building something that's going to give us a sustainable future, or is it just fixing a quick fix? Interesting enough, when asking some of these questions, people who were building out what seemed pretty cool things were starting to question even what they were building out. And I think that this shows that these are important things, and cultural indicators are really important, but we don't have indicators that we have as KPIs. So think about it, right? When we want to think about retention in a business, what do? Leads in, leads out, time that's staying with us, whatever. We look at that, we know what those numbers are. They become really important to us. My concern is, and something I wanted to prove with the data that I had and continue to prove as I'm building out things, is the importance of setting cultural indicators. In other words, things like human capital. We know that it's important to put into our team, to look after our team. Do we keep indicators on that? We know that, we need to work hard, but we also need to play hard. We need to have space to learn, place to develop. How are we showing that as we're building culture out? Some of these things that we've done because that's how everyone's done it. Do we really know if that's important or not? And so that's why I did really specific conversations around specific themes to gather data to start just be able to prove that there's a need for us maybe to start looking in on this, to start doing things differently. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, beautiful. I mean, the big difference, and what I love is, it reminds me of a story of meeting another podcast production person at a networking event, and she was talking to me about the issues she was having in her agency, And I was listening to her for a good 20 minutes, half an hour, and I'm like, so Nicole, like your clients, do they start a podcast to learn or do they start a podcast to teach? And she's like, they start a podcast to
Mm,
teach. Why would they start a podcast to learn? And I'm like,
yeah.
oh wow, that's the big difference.
Mm,
Like we've all set up our clients to create a podcast so that they learn and they become a
yeah.
student of their industry and what they're trying to give the world, and that makes it so much easier for them to show up, and it's a very different place, and I think that also allows them to show up, to your point, a bit open-minded as opposed to being an expert and knowing everything. So I love what you set
Well,
up
we
there.
don't know everything. That's the thing, right, Ronsley? Really don't. And what I love about it is that when you're in a conversation, I don't need to know everything. I just need to ask good questions so that we can have a good conversation and be able to link it. And I think that goes back to framework, right? I know where I want to take this conversation, as in, I just want to learn one thing. I want my audience to be able to learn something from this. I want to connect with the other human being. And I want to be able to, like I said, role model that it's as simple as having a conversation with another human being. And on the Global Human Intelligence podcast, I want us to go deeper. I want us to think, is there a need for a new approach to even to think about, and then to go, well, if we were to be smarter humans, how do we need to start thinking? What questions do we need to start asking? And if we are to look through the lens of humanity as stakeholders, what does that truly mean? Who is humanity? What is humanity doing? And how is culture looking right now? And what would that change be if we were to do it differently? So it's literally just great ways of sharing what you have to share with the world, and hopefully maybe connect with someone that might even open up a different way of thinking
Yeah.
that will even broaden what you're doing
Yeah.
and how you're serving others.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned as a podcaster is like how bad a listener I am, or and still continue
Oh,
to
me
be.
too. Mm.
It is such a huge learning every time I do an interview. You mentioned earlier culture, and I want to sort of
Mm.
maybe give that a little bit of time because I feel like that is a huge part of what we can take forward, especially with our conversations. And because conversations have always been this way of passing stories down, right? And it's been had in
Yeah.
different spaces, and it's been had. I mean, this is probably the generation now where the previous, like the grandmothers and the great grandmothers, are not necessarily part of the unit. What used to be the case. What parts of
Yeah.
culture do you think we kind of need to be looking at, especially with all the conversations you've had so far? Like, what are we um, we missing maybe, and where should we pay attention?
Yeah, so I think this is such a big conversation what you've just asked me. And I think one of the interesting pieces was putting on my Global Human Intelligence Forum in a time when it was the worst time in a lot of ways across the globe. There was so much racial tension at the time. If you said the wrong thing, there was cancel culture. And so many of my colleagues and leaders and friends were reaching out to me going, what do we say? How do we say it? Now, I always pre sort of frame when I'm having a conversation that I'm talking from my beliefs. I'm talking through the lens I'm looking through, and this is how I'm looking through it. And this is what I'm using in this conversation. And when I'm asking a question, actually, I don't have any preconceived ideas to what I want you to answer. I'm curious. And I think that we have to get more curious. We have to create an awareness, and that comes with you being secure, confident with who you are, knowing your own non negotiables, knowing what you stand for, knowing what are things that are okay for you. I call them your negotiables. And maybe if you and I have a conversation and you convince me, I might even make that one of my non negotiables, right? And I think so. There's this sense of an awareness, and for only will we ever create that awareness if we are in a safe space. And I know people go, I hate safe spaces. It's ugh. What I mean by a safe space is that we are creating a safe space that you can come, be seen, be heard, and have a voice. And we have to do that more in whatever we're building out in our culture that we are building out. We have to create this awareness. And then we have to decide as individuals, what is it I'm owning from what I'm aware of now? Then how does that going to affect the collective? And by the way, the collective, that's you and I, we make up the global space. So what we do affects the global space. Yeah? It's as simple as that. It's awareness, ownership, and then going from ownership, what is the change that I'm going to do, be, bring, now put in place so that actually a result is brought, or an outcome or a change is brought to the table.
Yeah.
And I think, we can't change everyone else, but we can change how we do things, how we show up, what tables we're willing to show up at, the culture we're willing to build out. We talk about these big, cool words like, inclusive. If you really go down into some of those conversations, how inclusive are you being when you have a table? Do they all look like you? Do they all sound like you? Are they thinking exactly? I love working across different industries because I'm going to learn something new. And things like, are we really willing to have a different conversation and do it differently? Or if you think differently, do we get rid of you, eliminate you at the table and say, no, that's not what we're doing here? Maybe it's not what you're doing there, but maybe it's something you might need to consider. Get curious. Are we being curious enough in our conversations? Or are we coming with our set agendas, our conditionings, our biases, systems that we've done it all this way for so long? I think it's when we're willing to do it differently and have a new approach, then we will see different things happen at the table.
So cool. I mean, I love the part about, not if someone disagrees at the table, they're not invited to the table anymore, and that's such a common thing that happens, right? It is so unfortunate that we can't sit in disagreement for long enough to like even hear someone's point of view out, so that we feel like so threatened by a different perspective that we're not even willing to give it a time of day. When we met last, I think it's when we met last, but when we were in Noosa, you mentioned how great the podcast was doing for you. You mentioned the results that you were getting. I would love for you to kind of just recap that, like how is the podcast doing, and right now maybe what is maybe getting in the way, if anything, for you making it.
Yeah. There's definitely me getting in the way of making it. It's nothing else. And that is more a time thing because, it's, I actually really enjoy spending time recording my Global Human Intelligence podcast. And I really love curating that particular one. So it's more the fact of a time thing for me. So it's just making sure it's a priority in there. The decision table, it's funny because we thought of actually stopping that going forward, but realized that's such an important part of what we're doing. And for us, it's a great entrance way into our way to whether or not we are a right fit to work together going forward as well, or partnerships, or spending more time together. So I really love that. And so we've decided that we will continue that. It won't always be me doing that. And I think that will help. I've got another podcast that's going to be, I've actually got a few podcasts coming into the pipeline because, that's just how I roll. I've recorded over the time through the pandemic with an amazing leader over in the US, and really talking about a lot of women issues and things like that. And so we were going to bring that out at one point. I'm hoping to meet up with her and figure out what we're doing with all of those recordings. But the thing that I'm really excited about is, as I said, we're really making a big thing over the 1% movement. And so there's going to be 1% conversations that we're having, and that's going to be a podcast. And why do I have all these podcasts? And by the way, another one is with Ethan. I really want to do that with the foundation side of it.
Yeah, that would be so cool.
And again, it's giving voice, right? Like it's giving voice to something that maybe you're not hearing these conversations in other places. But if you're really interested about that particular conversation, and we can dig deeper and go into there. And I think that's what I see for the podcast. It's been an amazing, avenue for me to have these different conversations in more depth in those. Like I said, you don't have to choose to listen to all of them. I wouldn't. But like maybe if you want to go deeper into some of those areas, go listen to that particular podcast. So that alone is something. And here's the thing, talking about the NOSA thing that I remember mentioning, that was it kind of blew me away, right? Because I've only really either been the secret sauce around with great leaders and never really seen myself as a influencer or one that influences of a bigger scale.
Yeah.
And so, I put the podcast because I pretty much had a lot of people bugging me going, why are you not putting it out as a podcast? Why have you not got podcasts out? So I did it more in protest than because I thought it was awesome, just for real transparency right there. And, but everyone was right. You needed to get it out. It is a good thing. And what has been good about that was like over, I don't know, it was like 6-7 months in both podcasts. They, if they hadn't hit, they were about to hit the 50,000 plus downloads on them. So, it has been an important part to getting them out, and both of them did that. So they obviously have their place, and I feel like that's not a bad thing when you've got a few listeners listening to it.
Wow, that's actually not a bad thing. I Ken put out the other day that he got 50 listeners on his new podcast, and I said, put a comment there, Rochelle, do you remember when I told you after 2 weeks that I only had 50 listeners? And it's sort of that momentum that starts to build up, because I remember driving 3 hours to talk to 3 people I didn't know. And that used to be the thing. So having 50 listeners is such a gift. I kind of feel like I want to ask you.
Want to know? Wait on. You want to know a crazy thing about that though?
Please tell me.
I got to say this because, dude, I know we know the business side, and we know that we should be doing this, and everything else. If I was doing all those things that you and I know, that would just be going skyrocket. I'm not even doing any of those things. This is all organic. It is literally me just posting it up there.
Well, that was going to be my next question, is like, what are you doing with the content? Like, how are you processing the content? What happens when you finish the recording? How does it go out?
Look, there's so many more things I'd love to say that I'm doing with them. I know what I should be doing and what I'm actually doing. Yeah, no. But like I said, one of the reasons I did some of the intense decision table ones was for these white papers. I now have that. In my work, I have no problems. I've got scientists going, I need you to get all this data behind you so that we can actually say, yes, this is all backed up by scientific, insights. And so what it has done is it's given me confidence that, and I'm a pattern girl, so I love the fact that you can't deny it when you're having conversations and people are saying the same things. Yes, we need a new approach. Yes, we want to do things smarter. Yes, we need to have different conversations. It motivates, it drives me to go, you know what? Even if sometimes doing it different, sometimes having these difficult conversations makes you the person people don't want to invite back, makes you the person that people don't want at the table. It makes it worth it for the one table that you get at.
Yeah. What I might do is I might just touch a little bit on the mistake for today, and I want to come back and ask you the question on, like, if someone's starting a podcast right now, what kind of tips and tricks you might have for them. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today's mistake is number 65, and we've compiled a list of mistakes that business owners make with their podcast, and literally you can fix them by reading them. So if you want a copy of that, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com and get your copy so that you just don't necessarily make them, or you know what to fix next. Today we're talking about forgetting that your audio volume needs to be equalized across all channels. Now, what I mean by that is if you have an interview, you want to make sure that your guest volume and your volume is the same. And not only that, if you have segments, which is the intro of your show, a call to action, the music, you want to make sure that that's not jarring. And you want to make sure that all the volume is the same so that when someone's listening, they don't have to like change the volume once they're listening. And this is something that I suppose you can only fix or only figure out that you need to fix after you listen to the finished product. So one of the mistakes that we also make as podcasters is we don't get a chance to, or we don't like to listen to our podcasts once they're done. And I think we should all listen to our podcasts at least once, not every single episode, but at least listen to them so we get a chance to improve on what we've just done. Now, again, this is number 65. If you want a whole list, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com and download that. All right, back to the show. Kiri-Maree, now that you've done so many podcast interviews, what kind of, what would you wish you did at the start, and what kind of like tricks and tips you might have for someone starting off their journey right now?
I think one of the first things I would do is just get started and stop procrastinating. Have conversations with people. Think of it, if you don't like interview style, I can do both. I can do interview. I've done, I've spoken on stages since I was very young. So, it's not something that's tricky for me to be in front of a camera to do all that sort of thing. If it is for someone else, then don't do the live shows. Do it as audio. Just press that and have a conversation. I like to make things as simple as possible. In other words, what do I feel comfortable doing? So there's nothing stopping you from actually getting on with it. I love having conversations with really smart people, and I love having conversations with friends of mine who are usually, by the way, really smart people. And I love having a coffee or a glass of champagne or wine or whatever. And if that makes it easy to have a really good conversation, then put that as part of it. The other thing that I found really tricky, and I have to say, like in your world, you're just like so good at getting all the right sounds, the right things. Just as if on cue, I dropped my headphone out of my ear.
That's so funny.
Just for social proof right now of not being perfect. That's me. And here's the thing that I love about that, right? is that when you already are just not this perfect human being, that you're just showing up, you're just having a conversation. That means I can get it wrong sometimes. It means I can say the wrong thing even sometimes. And maybe sometimes just not say it right. And what was stopping me as a newbie at it was I was afraid I was going to say the wrong thing. I was afraid that I would say things that people would not take right and get insulted with. Yes, I'm decisive. Yes, I'm very straight up. But I'm only straight up because I really care for human beings. And I'm only not messing around because I just don't have much time. And so I'm just trying to be really effective with my time. It can get misunderstood what I say sometimes. But I feel like nowadays, I actually know what I'm saying. I know where I'm heading. And like I said, if you want to come on that journey, come with me. But if you don't, I'm really clear, that just stop listening. Just don't come down on this, don't listen to this particular one. And I think if you can know that from the start, then, if you're wanting really prim, proper, very professional, then make sure you set it up in a way that you can actually deliver on that every time. I travel the world. That means sometimes we've got to do the computer in front of me, not the proper camera, I do actually have the wireless microphone on today, and but it depends on the internet, right? And it depends on what environment I can find myself in. I needed to be able to make sure that I wouldn't let things like that stop me. And I think if you can know that from the start, that's a really good thing. I think the other thing is you don't know who's listening. Boy, has it's been amazing who reaches out to me going, hey, by the way, I listened to this and I was wondering about that. And I was like, wow, I had no idea you were listening.
Yeah.
How cool is that? And you don't know who's listening.
Yeah. And how cool is that someone's listening? I find it a bit of so cool, like an artist putting out their work and someone going, oh wow, that's so nice. It's such a gift. When you mentioned earlier that what was stopping you is what would people think of what you said, that is not the intent. That is not something that someone who meets you or someone who even knows you, right, would imagine that something that like that would necessarily come in your way. What did you do and how did you reconcile that with yourself?
Yeah, so I this is such an easy answer for me. My vision, my dream for my work and what I do is so much bigger than what I am and my weaknesses and what I see myself as. And so my drivers are way beyond what my faults are. And I think if your drivers are, and your vision is bigger than your faults, that you'll do whatever it takes to do that. And that means showing up, while you're in the middle of Croatia, or it means that those long hours that everyone else is sleeping and you're working on a project, or it means when it's uncomfortable in that conversation, because trust me, I find myself at so many tables where it's really uncomfortable and I'm usually the only female at that table. That how do I deal with that? I go, well, this isn't actually about me. The best thing that I ever got to do, and I'll never forget this day, I was speaking on a global stage with, and I mean, these were phenomenal. Even for me, I was like, oh my goodness, that's like the first woman that went to up in space, and this is I was sharing a stage with the co-founder of NASA Medical Institute and and then there's Kiri-Maree. And I remember standing up there and I just said, I named the elephant in the room because, by the way, I don't have all those letters after my name. And I stood there and I said, hey, I'm Kiri-Maree and I'm standing today as a representative of the human race. And boy, that was the most amazing moment. I didn't care I didn't have all those letters. I didn't care that I didn't look like everyone else. By the way, I mentioned I didn't look like everyone else. And I said to them, and by the way, you probably have noticed I don't look like everyone else in this room. And that's a good thing because that means that I probably think very differently and I do things really differently. And that might mean you get a different result if you listen today. And I think that was such a key and pivotal moment in my world of knowing what it's like to turn up and really stand strong for what you are about. And it doesn't matter if, what's happening left or right. It matters what you're heading towards, what's driving you. And with that, by the way, is also the cost. Is it worth it? Is the investment worth it? And will you do it until you get, because sometimes it's hard work. So until you get those results you actually want.
Yeah. I mean, it's about doing the reps, right? This is so cool. I mean, thank you so much. Where can someone find you if they're looking for you, and how can they get in touch with you? Which is obviously.
I'm laughing because you couldn't find me. So, if you can't find me and you are my friend, you can find me. Just look at the 1%movement.com. We are revamping everything right now, and that is our center for connecting with us in our world. So the 1%movement.com. And what I want to do is, if this is okay, is if anyone can, please go to the Wall of Humanity, which is join the 1% movement, and put your 1% up on the wall. I can't wait to hear what you're doing, what that looks like when you do your 1%, so that we can really support you and make a difference and get 1 billion names up on the Wall of Humanity.
Love it. I'm going to add all those links in the show notes. So 1% movement. We'll go and link both your podcasts. Thank you so much for making the time to do this. When in Croatia, it's probably morning there, and you're just waking up, and
it is.
Yeah, and hopefully you're going to have an amazing day planned. I think Taki's already out and about, but thank you for making the time to do this. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Cheers.